Well, next, would you like to share your screen or anything like that?
Yeah, I will try to.
Yeah, you can say, and let me just introduce you.
Yeah.
So we're not at the start of the presentation. There we go. Great.
You're looking at right now. Is right or?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the title.
Okay, and you hear me right as well.
Yeah, we hear you fine. Okay, great. So that's the final talk of the day. I'm pleased to introduce Manuel Tangorra from the University of Louvain. He has previously studied at the University of Buenos Aires and at the University of Toulouse. His current research focuses on Hegel's philosophical anthropology and on its subsequent transformation in critical theory and psychoanalysis. He also has research interests in the wider idealistic tradition, especially the thoughts of Kant and Fichte, as well as contemporary debates concerning decolonial thought, Eurocentrism, and anthropological perspectivism. And as you see on the screen, his talk today is entitled The Inconstancy of the Barbaric Soul, Hegel's Epistemology of Radical Alterity. Over to you, Manuel.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you also to Luis and Pavel for organizing this amazing workshop. I really enjoyed almost every talk that I heard yesterday and this morning. So it's a pleasure to be sharing some of my current research with you. So I would like to begin my presentation by briefly explaining or presenting to you the text that sparked my hypothesis and the title of this talk. It's a book, actually. It's an essay by the Brazilian anthropologist Eduardo Viveiro de Castro called The Inconstancy of the Indian Soul. And it should be maybe translated as The Inconstancy of the Savage Soul. It could be translated as well. And in this text, Viveiro de Castro analyzed the epistemic implication of the missionary and colonial relationship between the Catholic Jesuits, the priest, the Jesuit priest, and the Native American people of Brazil in the process of conversion mainly in the 17th century. So as part of the analysis of this contact between those two actors, he quotes the famous Jesuit priest Antonio Vieira, which is a paradigmatic figure of the Jesuit tradition in Brazil and in South America as a whole, because he finds there a paradigmatic construction of this trope of the inconstancy of the soul of the native people. I will read just a little part of it. So, and I quote, this is the text of the Antonio Vieira from the 17th century, and I quote, "Some nations are naturally hard, tenacious, and constant, and with difficulty they resist the faith and leave behind the errors of their ancestor. They resist with arms, they doubt with their understanding, they repel with their will, they close themselves, they fear, they argue, they object, they take up much effort before they give themselves over. But once they have given themselves over, once they have received the faith, then they stay firm and constant in it, like statues of marble. It is no longer necessary to work with them. There are other nations, however, and such are those of Brazil, that receive everything that is taught to them with great docility and ease, without arguing, without objecting, without doubting. But they are statues of Myrtle, that if the gardener lifts his hand and his scissor, will soon lose their new form and return to the old natural Britishness, becoming as thick as they were before." So what Viveiro de Castro sees in this fragment is not simply the use of, let's say, a metaphor to think of the pragmatic exercise of conversion. The discourse of the Portuguese Jesuit is a symptom of something much more fundamental, It is a symptom of a crisis of the epistemic tools that allows the colonial discourse to define a knowledge of a culture, of a religion, in short, a knowledge of a spiritual formation of the human. So the reason why I decided to start today with this reflection, quite extemporary to Hegel, is that it made me to think that the knowledge of the spirit that is built in the 19th century and in this scientific framework of the 19th century manifests a similar symptom. So the main purpose then of my presentation will be to show that the Hegelian discourse presents radical alterity under the idea of this desiring inconstancy of the soul. So in this context, the idea of barbarism will be defined as this pathological form of the soul, of the formation of the human figure. So, and I chose just to explain the picture of Archimboldo that's because in Viveiro's De Castro perspective, this is the image that the Jesuit priest has in mind by referring to this Myrtle statue from this kind of vegetal statues. This picture that refers to this Baroque aesthetic that is in the background of this image of the inconstancy understood as the Myrtle statue. Back to my talk then, I will articulate my presentation then in 3 months. Firstly, I will analyze the Hegelian doctrine of the soul, of the spirit nature, of this Naturgeist, as the place where the racial differentiation is exercised. Then I will present to you the characteristic of the Hegelian notion of barbarism, which constitutes, in my perspective, this idea of a radical alterity. The characteristic of this specific otherness will be to introduce this fundamental inconstancy in the construction of the figures of spirit. And thirdly, if we have the time, hope so, I will try to relate the concept of inconstancy to another notion that took some relevance within the Hegelian scholarship in the last years, which is the concept of plasticity. I will evoke then, of course, the work of Catherine Malabou in her reading of Hegel. But then let's start with the beginning. I maybe will be repeating some of the notions that were presented yesterday as well. But I would like to present my perspective today, not as trying to see in Hegelian theory of race a particular ideological position. My idea is to think the relationship between colonialism and Hegel thought, not just in historical perspective, nor in a normative, ethical, or political perspective, but my aim is to focus on the epistemological implication of the construction of a Eurocentric knowledge of the spirit. So here in a certain way, I'm taking up Louis' perspectives yesterday in this idea of constructing a history of knowledge, a history of the formation of a scientific consciousness in a certain way. So in order to do so, we must firstly identify the place of the construction of the raciology, or the theory of race. And this is, in Hegelian system, is quite clear. This place of the racialization of the existence is the soul. However, I think that at this point it becomes this spatial metaphor that I presented here with this circle is no longer productive, I think, because the soul is not an intermediate zone between nature and spirit, and not, for instance, a spirit that still remains too natural, as if it were like a residue, a resistance of the previous domain. I think that this is more useful to reflect on the soul as a specific entity. So as a specific piece of the puzzle, to keep the image that we are using here. So it engaged a new type, a specific type of relation between nature and spirit that is let's say a model and a new economy of this relation. So I propose to think of the soul as the moment of the spirit that is affected by its corporality. And affected, however, means anything other than determined by its body. This is what these external arrows could be expressing, like an external determination, a mechanical determination from nature into the spirit. So the soul allows us to think of the situational rudeness of consciousness, the situational experience of consciousness, and the situational experience of knowledge itself. So what is thus targeted, hierarchized in those in famous passage of the Hegelian anthropology, mainly in the lecture of the philosophy of the subjective spirit, is not just bodies, natural capacities, nor physical geographical space that would determine the performance of freedom from without. Instead, what is targeted is the desiring relationships to nature. What Grace describes here is a type of relation to bodies, is a way of living the bodies where freedom, in the case of the non-European races, is caught up in a specific drift of its realization. It's not a natural force that comes to constrain freedom, but in a certain way, it is a matter of a positive deviation of freedom in its relation to the body and to the surrounding world. Needless to say, of course, that this racial theory of the drive, in the sense of greed, that is not the just natural desire, implies putting European corporality at the top of the hierarchy, where the conscious individuality undertakes its way of self-determination by doing away with nature's constraint. We can say that there is a corporal conditionality that allows the subject to be independent of any corporality. But it is a corporal, somatic condition. This is the paradoxical dialectic that shapes, from my perspective, the Hegelian knowledge of the soul. The soul constitutes the border of the consciousness adventure. Is there then when the norm of the civilizing standard is exercised? So let's move to the second part for talk, focus on the concept of barbarism. The question here is if the epistemological implication of Hegel's theory of race, concluding this hierarchical differentiation that I just talked about. We have this construction of the taxonomy of races, going from the inferior races to the top of the pyramid in the European standard. But I believe that there is an even more fundamental operation at stake, which consists in positing through the desire and somatic differentiation a more radical cleavage. There is a cleavage between civilization and barbarism. So I think that the concept of barbarism, with the concept of barbarism, the Hegelian discourse takes an additional step. It indicates not simply the racial difference, nor the sole inferiority of the new European peoples, but rather the threshold where the drive of the subject does not succeed in objectifying itself in a culture recognizable as such. So what is then this spiritual structure of the barbaric soul? It is a desire and performance of freedom, desire in its material implication, linguistic, religious, political, etc., which does not succeed in fixing itself in its object in a durable way. There is so kind of a threshold of objectivation of freedom, which allows the subject to recognize itself in what it has produced and to eventually sublate the subject. But without this first elementary fixation, there is no possible progress. There is no possible Aufhebung without this constancy in the relationship to the object. So in this matter, the case of African people is emblematic of this process of barbarization of non-European spiritual existed. It's not simply an alterity, a different form of being. It engaged a type of drive that disrupt the idea of a spiritual and social objectivation. And that is what allows Hegel to produce knowledge on human. So I will quote this short sentence that is from the lesson of philosophy of history. I quote, "In general, we have to say that in the inner Africa, the consciousness has not yet come to the conception of a fixed object, of an objectivity in general. This fixed object may be called God, the eternal, the law, nature, or natural things," unquote. So what is compromised here is what I call the objectal form of the drive, the objectal form of the process of becoming a subject. So you want this, sorry for the bit messy, those pictures, but taking for instance, we can take as an example the division in the history of religion between monotheistic and polytheistic religions. This division already supposes as acquired the meaning of the particle theism. This supposes this homogeneous relationship to the object that allows the subject to posit a being that holds there constantly in front of the consciousness as something objective. That can be, of course, then overcome and negated in a dialectical process. But religious barbarism will thus find this the objectivation in a constant inconstancy of the objective form. And then is the paradigmatic case of that is fetishism. Fetishism is a paradigmatic example of the destructuring of the objective form of God. It's not just polytheism. The believer, for instance, invests his desire in the particularity of a random object, but this object does not have the durable and stable form that allows the construction of a faith in the proper sense. It is extremely precarious, and it's the very same drive that has posited as divine, as God, that will destitute it, and replace it quickly with another. So to conclude this part, it could be said that the characteristic of the barbarian race is not to have a specific form of nature, nor in a specific form of culture, nor a certain type of religious dogma or political regime and so on, but a trouble in the objective regime of Hegelian knowledge. It is the grammar of the intelligibility, takes Rocio Zambrana's words that she brought up yesterday, that is compromised by this barbaric existence. This is what makes barbarism a necessarily ambiguous, borderline, uncertain phenomenon out of which it is difficult to produce a certain knowledge. The barbarian soul is therefore necessarily characterized by its inconstancy. So I have a couple of passages here. I'm not going to read it completely, but just the beginning of this passage of the text of the lesson on the philosophy of history said, one find the highest, unquote, one find the highest physical strength, and along with benevolence, Gemütigkeit, Gutmütigkeit, the most outrageous cruelty. So, and I have also a similar passage about on the Mongolian race, let's say the Asian people. So those passages, I think, those concerns are crucial to show the epistemological problem that we're trying to address here. The very definition of the barbaric soul is affected by the spiritual structure of barbarism. A barbaric nation, a barbaric people cannot be defined by identifying its cultural attributes because its existence does not fit into the objective form of culture. One cannot, for example, attribute to it, to the barbaric people a determined character. We can, as did the authors of the Enlightenment, with this figure of the savage, brought to the 18th century, determine the figure of the savage as once and for all, as having one main attribute, like the savage as a warrior for Hobbes, or the savage as a shy and yes, timorous individual for Rousseau. It doesn't matter the content, but we can define once and for all this main characteristic of this alterity. The characteristic of the barbaric soul is then to be in permanent oscillation, in an impulsive activity that does not let itself to be captured by knowledge in a cultural, religious, determined identity. It is this existence that conforms a radical alterity, one that is not just different from the Eurocentric standard, from the Christian norm, we could say also, but that disturb the regime of objectivity, disturb the regime of intelligibility of difference. So the inconstancy of this barbarian soul form a type of relation to body that prevent this elementary stabilization that will allow the phenomenological and historical development of the consciousness to take place. There is no history of consciousness in proper sense without this normalization of the pathological desire and existence of the soul. So in the anthropology, this normalization of desire finds its expression in the concept of habit, Gewohnheit. This notion of habit refers to this process of initiation to the constancy of the objective form. It allows to stabilize the drive in an unconscious attachment to the matter, to the object, to nature, so as to form the somatic and affective base of any later institutionalization of freedom. The habit, the habituation, is what makes it possible to make the somatic reality of the spirit indifferent. But habituation is itself a somatic process. This is the way. It refers to the process of making use the subject to have a stable and rational relation to the object, a relation to the law, to God, to the state. That is this type of relation that is targeted here. So habit is at the core of what Hegel understands as civilizing formation. To civilize is not to transpose a certain culture, a certain dogma, but to produce the condition of admissibility of any institution, of any spiritual content. It's in this sense that I bring forward the reading of Catherine Malabou, since from her perspective, habit is not a way, it's not just a way of being, but, and I quote, is a way of having. Habit is a way of having a law, of having a God, a property, which makes it possible to absorb the situationality of freedom into the rational objectivation of the subject. So let's think here, for instance, of the role of work that Hegel sees in the process of colonization. And here I speak specifically about the Jesuit mission as a place of normalization of the indigenous existence through the induction of work as an introduction of this relation to the object, a relation of as a producer, as the individual as a producer, the individual as an owner. So let's move to the final moment. I would like to discuss this fundamental idea of the inconstancy of the barbaric soul in relation with the reading proposed by Catherine Malabou, a reading that is structured around the concept of plasticity. I don't know if you are familiarized with this reading. I think that she gave a talk yesterday in Leuven. I'm right, or I saw something like that. Yeah, well, I saw it in the internet. But I'm going to analyze the whole project of Malabou's reading, and just want to put in relation those two concepts, because I think that something is important here to think on the relation of the Hegelian text with this border of the European experience. So to present quickly the idea of Malabou. For Malabou, is the habit of the soul, which allows to neutralize the dysfunctional repercussion of the corporeal embodied existence of the spirit, and to form plastic individualities in the individual, that is the concept of Malabou, is to produce a type of relation to the object where the contingency of the somatic concrete situation is sublimated, absorbed, and in certain ways silenced, so that the figures of the free consciousness, as in the phenomenology, can develop. I think that Malabou's reading makes a point here that I think that is very important, because the Hegelian normalization is not just a distraction, an annihilation of the difference. It's not an empire of the identical, let's say. It consists quite differently in producing a specific model of differentiation, what is very different. And this model of differentiation is the plastic figuration of the subject. It is a question of producing in the figure the stable form of the progression, the constancy that allows the movement. There is this fixation that allows the progress. This is the paradox of this construction of the habit. But in fact, Catherine Malabou presents in that book two different forms of plasticity, which constitute two regimes of differentiation, let's say. There is first the plasticity that she characterized as typically Greek, classical, from antiquity. Individuals are in this case the place of production of the generic essence of the human. The model, because Malabou is taking the steps of the development of Hegel in the lecture on aesthetics, on philosophy of art. So the model is here the Greek statue. The subject there is nothing but the work to engrave in the marble and the bronze the essence of the human. But this essence doesn't exist before this corposomatic formation. It exists only in the very construction of this plastic individuality. It is in a certain way, as Malabou, this is the end of the text here, is an essence a posteriori. This is the idea. And the second model of plasticity is, of course, the Christian and modern model of subjectivation. Here we find the inverse and the symmetrical model. It is the becoming accidental of the essence, that is the becoming singular of the absolute. It is the entire Christian motive of the kenosis that allows to situate the individuality, the singular, as the place of the temporalization of the absolute. So the aesthetic model is no longer the Greek statue, but the Romantic art, especially painting, which makes the singularity, takes the singularity and the singular individuality as the center of the process of subjectivation. There is this birth of the gaze that is present for Hegel in that kind of art. There is the introduction of the individual in the construction of the figure of human, of what humanity is. So we have these two regimes of plasticity, these two models of constructing the subjectivity that are in Malabou's perspective, there are like entangled in the Hegelian text in order to give an account of the construction of the subjectivation of freedom. So we have this symmetrical inverted relation. We have this becoming essential of the accident and the becoming accidental of the essence, but is entangled in this dialectic of producing the universal in the particular and producing the particular as the place of revelation of the universe, the absolute. So I have not a lot of time, but just you can guess my hypothesis here is that in the margin of the Hegelian text, there is a third form of plasticity, of subjectivation. This form of plasticity that is found in the periphery of this Greek, Western, and Christian path of subjectivation. This is a dysfunctional plasticity of barbarism. The form is marked by the inconstancy of an essence that does not manage to make the accidental situation the stable place of its figuration. It is a disruption of the materiality of the marble, or of the bronze, or even of the canvas. We can take the example of the Romantic art, which doesn't enable to fix the accident, as well as to fix the eventual form of the Christian event. So it formed a type of drive that disfigured the essence through the accidents. The situationality always return in an uncontrolled way. So to conclude, let's return to the relationship between philosophical knowledge and radical alterity. The text of Viver de Castro's on the Jesuit discourse shows how the European and Christian framework was limited, not just by its own identity, but in the way of understanding difference. This is why the idea of the marble statue, that image, with this idea, there is the supposition of the constancy of the figures of freedom as the general grammar to understand the human existence. In that sense, the Hegelian notion of barbarism is a symptom of this border of such grammar. Barbarism is presented in the form of a disturbance on the epistemic regime that makes possible to formulate a universal knowledge of human. It forms then, barbarism forms a Myrtle sculpture, a statue, if you want, a figure made in another relation to materiality. It's not another figure. It's not even the infigurable. It's the border, the threshold of a regime of figuration. So barbarity cannot be thematized according to its essence, according to its culture, customary, or religious reality. It is necessarily apprehended within Hegelian text as a desire in corporality, as a drive that structures the objective regime of civilized freedom. The modern and colonial text identifies in the barbaric soul the edge of this objective form that makes possible to construct the figure, that is to construct a knowledge of the spiritual existence of human. That will be all, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manuel. It was very, very rich, very challenging talk. And yeah, the questions are ready. So first is Stefan.
So just a minute. I don't know how to put you on.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Sorry, just a minute because I cannot see you.
Yeah, do you want to just...
You have to stop sharing.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Manuel. That was really a fascinating talk. I liked the quotation you started with, which was sort of bizarre, because if you change a hardened substance into some other hardened substance, can't you continue to change it? So I understand for the Jesuits how this would be an attractive model in some sense, but in some sense it just sort of goes to the changeability of all substance. And I like very much how you drew apart in your final slide the two different ways in which substance can be related to accidents. But the third figure that you talked about was, it seems to me, also a figure of the bad infinity.
Sorry?
The bad infinity. Yeah. And I mean, when Hegel mentions the bad infinity, he usually talks about it as a failure of thought in some way. And so I mean, this is just to add to your thinking. Maybe if the colonial subject is really something like a bad infinity, maybe that itself it's the expression of a certain failure of thought in Hegel's thinking, in Western thinking, and some other kind of thinking. But that's just more of a comment that I was just moved to say that because I thought this was so interesting.
Well, thank you very much, Professor, for the question, for the comment. I mean, it has been already. There are some other relates bad infinity to the horizon of the colonial expansion, right? Because it's kind of at the moment where the European history is kind of achieved. We have this extensive moment of realization, different from the intensive, let's say. This difference, I think that is useful to think on this different. And this is what it changed for me, the idea of what is a periphery. A periphery is this perpetual bad infinity that is supposed in the construction of the figure. That is what I try to bring up in a way, because you have to construct the figure of what a world history is, and then to mark the borders of that figure, you have to identify this border existence that is from my perspective the barbaric existence. This is what defines civilization. The civilization is nothing more than this perpetual and constant normalization of its own border in a certain way. That's why, yeah. But the idea, I think that the idea of bad infinity works very well. Thank you very much for the comment.
Further questions? I will ask one in the meantime. Yeah, thank you very much. I found it really fascinating. I must say, well, I mean, I'm no Hegel expert, and it's a long time since I read Malibu, and it became very difficult for me at the end, because as I understood it, you were rehabilitating Hegel's notion of the barbaric souls, or against Hegel's specific use of that, making a kind of positive claim out of these questionable passages. But then what you did with it at the end was, as I understood it, framed within Malibu's philosophy. So as a third wave against her two kind of, you could say, I suppose, Eurocentric conceptions of plastic subject formation. And so I was just wondering very simply, what would you be able to present it kind of not within the framework of Malibu's philosophy, but I mean, what does this do more generally?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Really, it was not my intention to kind of criticizing Malibu in a way. It's just that he takes as the model of subjectivation, but then it's normal because he's taking, you know, a modern text as the corpus of her analysis. So it's not a problem at all. But she's taking this. The models are Greek and Christian model. So in a certain way, this is what shapes the understanding of subjectivation within Hegelian text. And it's right. She's right. I mean, these are let's say the main avenues of the subjectivation in Hegelian text. My idea was just to identify within Hegelian text, not like bring something from the exterior. Within Hegelian text, there is the construction of a dysfunctional type of subjectivation that is always there, calling for the normalizing practice of the expansion of the civilizing mission in a certain way. But it's always in a certain one could say it's always internal to the Hegelian text, what I'm trying to do here, at least in the first moment. Then we could think what happens outside the Hegelian text with this, and it would be interesting as well, because just to say a word about that is what Vivero de Castro does, is he takes this inconstancy and he makes an ontology of the inconstancy that will be present in the indigenous nations of Brazil. It's not what I'm doing here. I'm just staying at them in the border, but within the modern and Hegelian text in this case. So thank you for I know if I answer more or less.
Yeah, we have multiple questions, so we'll take the next one from Ruth.
Okay, so yeah, thanks, Steve. Thank you, Manuel. It was fascinating, and also the PowerPoints were really nice. And yeah, I have a question related to this point that you just mentioned, and perhaps I will try to take a little bit out of the text of Hegel's text. I know that that's what you're doing, but I was just wondering, because as you know, the text that you quoted from Vivero de Castro here will actually accept the description of the, so to say, barbarian or Indian soul as inconstant, and he will praise it, and he will try to show that there are several other qualities that are attached to this inconstancy, such as being receptive and accommodating and creative and so on and so on. So he kinds of accepts the description, but tries to reverse the values that you ascribe to this description. And in your reading, I kind of got the feeling that you were rather going the direction of saying, look, perhaps this description of the barbarian soul is a projection, or perhaps it is problematic in itself. So I was just wondering, how do you see these two different attitudes? Whether you approach the description as a problematic one, or you accept it, but you try to show that you should attribute different values to it. So yeah.
No, thank you, Luis, for the question. It's really let's say the core of the question. I'm not just looking at it as problematic in the sense that saying that it is I don't know, normative, problematic in a set of course it is, but my perspective is to in a certain way to accept that Hegelian discourse, not just as something that is in Hegel's mind, but it's a process of producing the reality of the colonial world. It's not just let's say an ideological projection that we could read away and just now we are decolonial and the world suddenly is no, it's something that is inscribed in reality itself. Sure. So the barbarization is not just an ideological process. That's the problem that we. So it's interesting what Vivero de Castro does, because he tries to think how to think that is these other ways of being in relation with culture, with religion, etc., and to trace this limit, this border of the European grammar of the cultural existence. But I think that here is where I take a little bit of a distance from his project, is let's say the ethnological strategy in a certain way, because in a certain point in this text he goes away from this crossing between the Jesuit and the natives, and he tries to do a certain ontology of inconstancy. Sure. Yeah. It is an option. And is the option of the counter anthropology, and you know a bit of that project, and it's interesting, but it's not what I'm trying to stay in a certain way, like in those readings, and some of them you mentioned yesterday, those readings that in a certain way inhabit this border of the modern text that is the modern reality. That is not just, you know, and to try to inhabit this border to distort the figure of the colonizing order, let's say. I think that, yeah, I know about what Fanon does, what Dussel does. It's more like trying to work in this border with the European text, let's say, with the modern text. I know if my answer is
no, it's great. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have 3 more questions. I think we could maybe take 5 minutes, but they should be relatively. Karen.
Okay, thanks. I thought this was very interesting, and I have a question concerning the reading of Hegel. Do you think that your focus on these constellations of kind of dysfunctional, no, how did you put it? A dysfunctional type of subjectification. Yes, that doesn't really.
Sorry, could you because I don't hear you very well. I know if.
Try to identify a type of dysfunctional subjectification. Yes, that doesn't really get to kind of stability. And I thought this was very interesting. But I was wondering if you take your own proposal to somehow undermine Hegelian dialectic, or do you think that the Hegelian dialectic can, as it were, make sense of this and just treats this dysfunctional mode of subjectification as a very inadequate instantiation of proper subjectification. So we simply, admit the barbaric in lack of constancy, but then in the narrative we go on and move to more advanced types. So you could argue that Hegel or Hegelian can deal with this. Yes, so but I think that you want to somehow interrupt the movement of dialectical overcoming, but I wasn't completely clear in which way. I hope my question is clear.
No, it's thank you very much, Professor De Boer, for the question. It's really also a very fundamental one. The thing that what I'm trying to do with this idea of the dysfunctional subjectivation, or the pathological, I call also the pathological subjectivation, is try to decide if we continue to trust Hegelian dialectic or not, is to in a certain way embody Hegel's dialectic in this relationship with its let's say dysfunctional drift. But the main thing here is that those dysfunction comes from within the dialectical process, and that's I think that is very important, because it's not, for instance, the resistance of an undialectical element in a certain way. So what I think that we can do with Hegel dialectic, and that's what in a certain way the post-colonial authors do, is to decenter the Hegelian dialectic from its pure functionality in a certain way. So to accept moments, instance that collapse the not just one element within dialectic, but the very let's say logic of the dialectical process. That is, we have in a certain way to accept that radical crisis of the economy of dialectica in a certain way, I don't know how to do it, but I think that is what is let's say suggested in some readings, to introduce, to open the very logic of dialectic to their non-functional, dysfunctional moments. That is to, yeah, I'm not sure if I answer, but because I'm not sure of the answer within myself. So I know that is satisfactory.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have only a remark, and it's also not a philosophical remark, but a horticultural remark. You contrast marble and myrtle, and it helps to know that myrtle is one of the species of shrub or tree that is used for topiary art, for creating sculptures out of living plants, so that if you abandon that cultivation process, leaving the clippers aside, as it were, for the garden to step aside, the tree will barbarize, as it were, in the language of the imagery that is used in the contrast between marble and myrtle. But that was all I need to say. Thank you.
Oh no, of course. Thank you very much for. I didn't find an image of the Myrtle statue that would be like worthy to put in the. So that's why I chose the painting of Archimboldo, because it was kind of this Baroque destructuring of the figure. That is like a kind of like grounding every construction of the picture of what a human being is. So, but yeah, this is the idea of this opposition between marble and Myrtle. Thank you, Professor.
Great. And our last question, Francis, what would you like to Thanks for this.
Thank you very much, Manuel. So I was thinking, aren't there in Hegel models for an epistemology of alterity that are a bit more optimistic, perhaps? So in various places in the philosophy of history, he describes processes between groups of people where maybe one group also considers the other to be barbaric, and there are huge cultural differences, but then he talks about flows of knowledge and learning processes that go in both directions, and somehow something new develops out of the mixture, kind of pluralization, if you wish, in pre-modern times. But given that that actually even involves Africa in the case of Egypt, where he says that the African principle is part of that mixture somewhere, somehow something new evolves. So if one compares this discussion of sub-Saharan Africa and indigenous Americans and the colonial context with those other passages, I was wondering if you had any ideas about why he didn't use that other kind of model, kind of more productive relation to alterity and in those colonial contexts.
A more productive relation to alterity, you mean? That's right.
So you can where something like a productive process can where cultures mix and something new can appear. I mean, for example, in the case of Haiti, why doesn't he acknowledge the possibility that something new could? Perhaps the revolutionaries were somewhat inspired by European ideas, but then they created an original form of their own kind of republic and their own culture.
Yeah.
No, just go only one way.
Yeah, no. Thank you for your question. And of course, in a certain way, because the case of Haiti, there is this quite famous text in the lecture of the philosophy of the subjective spirit, I think, that talks about Haiti. And what you kind of see that from my perspective is that those adoption of Christian religion and the Republican idea, it needs this prior normalization of the drive. And it's in that very passage, he says, there is a problem. They have the aptitude to have culture, but the problem is the indigenous drive. So in a certain way, you have, the problem is not the capacity. The problem is the actual drive. It's not the virtual capacity. So in a certain way, within the Hegelian text, I think that there is a moment of normalization of this indigenous drive, because otherwise the process, the creative appropriation of atheism wouldn't be possible from Hegel's perspective, of course. I feel that kind of dialectic in that passage of IT. I don't know if you feel the same, or you think that there is something else.
I think I agree. I just wonder if that isn't then in the end a kind of assimilation, or and in that case, I wonder why he has to interpret it in that way and make that choice, given that other models of relations between very different cultures were also available to him.
Yeah. No, of course, this horizon is of course possible, even within the Hegelian framework. It's not, and in a certain way, I don't know if I had time, but this barbaric horizon is always there, like kind of also nourishing the civilizing mission. So it has a productive role there. That's a bit of the key of the Hegelian understanding there. So I think, thank you for the question.
Great. Okay, I think it's time to finish. So let's firstly thank Manuel very much for this last talking.
Thank you very much.
And I'll give the word to Lewis and Pavel for the final word, but just before doing so, should we thank our two organizers plus our unofficial co-organizer, Karen, for putting up really very stimulating and exciting events. So thanks very much.